Well, today we're going to be talking about Luke chapter 2. This is one of the probably most popular chapters in the New Testament because this is the birth of Jesus, the whole birth story, everything that goes along with this. So, this is a little unique to the book of Luke. We know that Matthew talks about the birth of Jesus. He mentions some of the things about prophecy being fulfilled with the birth of Jesus. John actually starts his story with the pre-mortal Jesus, so before he was even born, and doesn't give a ton of detail on his birth, but then moves on to talk about the rest of his life. So Luke chapter 2 has a lot for us to talk about today. Verse 1, and it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Now, this is these days. So, what are these days? Christ was born probably, a lot of people want to say he was born right at like 0 BC or 0 AD. Because if you've noticed in the Old Testament, the time counts down and then it gets to 0 and then counts up. So, BC counts down, AD counts up, or if you're doing the BCE and then CE, basically is how that time scale works. So we're counting up how many years since 0. Most scholars believe that Christ was born between 3 and 6 BC, not right at 0. So three or 4 is probably the more accurate one. I think more people agree with that one. So this is probably around April time frame. This was spring, basically. This is the season of new life, springtime for this time frame. Now Caesar Augustus. Okay, now Augustus oversaw the most peaceful period of time in the Roman Empire. This is really fascinating to think about. Okay, Roman Empire has been around for about 300 years at this point. So it's an old empire, been around for a long time. They've recently gone through 2 civil wars inside the empire. Fascinating stories to get into those stories. In fact, of what happened. The first civil war is really interesting. If you've, I'm trying to remember the name of the movie. There's a movie that's out there. I think they made a sequel of it. That the premise of the movie is one day a year, all the laws are suspended. You can, do whatever crime you want because for 24 hours you can. So murder is legal for 24 hours, and so people like lock down their homes for that one night, and you don't want to be on the streets. Um, it's really interesting because that kind of goes off of actually a story of the first civil war for Rome. The first civil war they had was there was a gentleman who was in the government. He kind of rose up through he wasn't necessarily born into the royalty, born into the aristocracy, but he rose up through those ranks and was a military leader. And that's how he was able to get up into the governmental ranks. He was he was a guy that was loyal to his troops. One of the problems they had in Rome at the time was their troops would go off and fight, which were the average common people would go out and fight. And while they're gone, their farms would languish because the men are gone, the women and children are left at home, and they can't necessarily do all the work. And so they lose money. They end up getting foreclosed on loans and other stuff. And so the wealthy people who aren't off fighting the war, they got the opportunity to buy up all the soldiers' land. So the soldiers come home from war, find out they're debtors. They don't even own their own land anymore. The wealthy aristocrats who are running the government, they own all the land basically. And so the problem is there was no compensation, there was no help and support for these troops. So they're like, hey, we went off and fought a war for you, and we come home and get totally screwed over by the government. So this guy went to bat for them, and it ended up turning into a civil war. It was crazy. The emperor at the time basically produced a list of people and said, "These are the people who are the ones against us. These are the treasonous people, and they're fair game. If you kill them, if you're a slave and you kill one of these people and bring us evidence that you killed them, you are going to go free. So it turned into so basically he put a hit out on his political enemies and got them killed. It was crazy. So that was part of the one of those first civil wars that happened. It was such a wild time. So a lot of wars, a lot of contentions, a lot of challenges that Rome had. Um, but what's interesting is when Caesar Augustus comes in, right around this time, he comes in a little bit before Christ is born, and he's ruling during this time. It is the most peaceful time in the history of the Roman Empire. After this, after 30 AD, when Christ passes away, war comes back, more conflicts, more problems come back. So this time when Christ is alive is literally the most peaceful time in the history of Rome, for the most part. Basically, it's pretty amazing. In fact, a little bit more on this. Augustus's father was posthumously proclaimed a god in 42 AD, so he used the title Son of God on coins. He was considered a savior of the people with the amount of peace and stability he brought the empire. So Augustus it was a good time to be alive. If you're going to be alive anytime during the Roman Empire, this was a pretty good time. Now, also, I had some interesting information here. This is from Johann Mosheim's Ecclesiastical History. He says here about this time frame that Christ is being born into. He says, at the birth of Christ, this amazing federation of the world into one great monarchy had been finally achieved. Augustus at Rome was the sole power to which all nations looked. No prince, no king, no potentate of any name could break the calm which such a universal dominion secured. It was in such a unique era that Jesus Christ was born. The whole earth lay hushed in profound peace. All lands lay freely open to the message of mercy and love which he came to announce. Nor was the social and moral condition of the world at large at the